Do you want to have the confidence to truly rock retirement? Well, I'm going to show you how on the Retirement Answer Man Show. Have you ever looked through the opening of a glass soda bottle, like a Coke bottle? We used to do that as kids, and everything became distorted. You could see the light coming through the bottle, but you really couldn't see what was in front of you or around you. Sometimes in our lives, thinking about where we're at and what's going on is a little bit like looking through the opening of a Coke bottle. And it makes sense because we are the central character of our life. And when you're looking out of your life, everything is obscured or distorted by our perceptions. And sometimes we can't really see what's going on until it reveals itself maybe later on. And when you're approaching a life change, that Coke bottle could be your work. It could be the busyness of the family. If you're retired, it could be the normal routines that you have. And this is a little bit of what we talked about last week. And the reason I'm bringing this up again is by the time you hear this, I will be in Colorado for the month. June, we are spending in Colorado. I'll be working and playing. And we've done this for a few years. And one thing I really like about this exercise that I really hadn't anticipated is that by going away and living somewhere else for a period of time, you get out of your normal routines and it gives you perspective. It gives me perspective on my life. It gives my wife and I a different perspective on where we're at, how things are going, what we want for the future. It's really been a healthy exercise. It essentially gets us out of the Coke bottle and allows us to examine our life from a different perspective, not actually being in the normal routines of things. So as you are planning, say, retirement, or if you're already retired and have a very set routine, I would encourage you to consider maybe walking in a park for a long period of time and thinking about things, or maybe getting a VRBO or renting a hotel and get out of your normal routine to do your planning or to think about the future, because that might give you a different perspective and get you out of that Coke bottle. My name is Roger Whitney. Welcome. I'm the host of the show. And this entire month on the show, we're going to focus on answering a lot of your questions, a lot of listener questions. So we're not going to have an overall theme for the month other than talking about the things that you want to talk about. So if you have a question for the show, you can go to rogerwhitney.com/Ask Roger, and we'll do our best to answer it here on the show. So this episode, before we get to listener questions, I want to just talk about random thoughts on the retirement scene. One of my favorite authors and columnists, Thomas Sowell, who wrote Basic Economics, great book for kids, older kids, to understand basic economic concepts. Used to write an article for, I forget what paper it was, but every now and then he'd just do random thoughts. And so I thought I'd spend some time talking about some random thoughts on the retirement scene from my observations in working with clients directly, talking to everybody in the Rock Retirement Club. And so let's just go over a couple of these. First one is changing processes periodically is really having no process at all. This could be in your financial planning process. It could be an investment management process. If you tend to change dramatically your course and how you make decisions on things, and that's what I think a process is. You go from I'm a value investor, and then you're a growth at a reasonable price investor, and then you're a momentum investor, and then you're going to try these hedge funds as an example. Changing your process too often is really not having a process at all. There's no consistency in decision making. Now, this doesn't mean that you don't adjust your process and tweak it, but it still should have the same spirit and theme, because you're definitely going to learn and make adjustments to your retirement planning process. But all too often in retirement planning, I see people looking for the perfect process, and they end up hopping from process to process, which means they really don't have one at all. When I say I see people, people like you walking this, but I also see advisors do it a lot as well. Trying to estimate future market returns is a fool's game. There's a lot of active debate on, do we use historical returns on stocks or bonds or different asset classes? Or do we forecast what we think the returns will be given, pick your poison. Some people will say based on the Shiller ratio and where we are from a price to earnings perspective, that forward-looking returns for this asset class or another asset class are going to be better or be worse. Bonds are a good example right now of, hey, we've been in this 30 plus year bull market in bonds where interest rates have dropped consistently to where we're near zero. And so we can't use historical returns for bonds because at some point this is going to have to revert and bonds are going to have a different return experience than they've had in the past 20 or 30 years. That's an example of trying to estimate or guess what future returns might be for bonds. And we see this for stocks. They're overvalued, they're undervalued, inflation based on whatever matrix you want to look. My position is that trying to estimate and guess what future market returns are going to be and then making these adjustments to your retirement plan, it's a fool's game. You can't guess. You can't figure this out. You can use very long-term historical returns and then move on to focus your time, which is finite, on things you can actually control. You got to be careful the kind of words you find yourself using. A good example is using I deserve versus I am responsible. Those are two terms that are very different. So as an example, my wife should be nicer to me. I deserve it. I deserve my wife or my husband to do this for me. I deserve this raise. If you say I deserve, it robs you of all responsibility and robs you from any power in influencing things. You deserve something. Somebody needs to give you something. Whereas if you say I'm responsible for, use marriage as an example, I'm responsible for creating a great marriage. That is a powerful statement. I'm responsible to create a great marriage, puts you in action to try to improve your marriage. I'm responsible for getting myself a raise. Then that leads to, okay, what do I need to be doing to get that raise if I don't have it now? Or what do I need to be doing to create this great marriage if I'm not getting it now? I remember early on in my marriage, just to use that one as an example, I had a lot of I deserves. And then I got resentful when I didn't get it, even though I didn't articulate what I wanted. And then it became this game of, well, they're not giving me what I deserve, so I'm not going to give them what they deserve. That's a horrible way to do it. And I remember that. But then when I finally said, oh, I'm responsible for creating a great marriage, I stopped waiting to get what I thought I deserved. And I started giving and started serving, which created a feedback loop where I started to get what I wanted. I created that. I was responsible for it. I didn't just sit there and deserve it. You can't conquer retirement. You can't conquer it. You can't figure it out. You just got to live it. Sort of like life. If you are using a retirement planning process based on investments as the hub of everything, using investments as the hub, you got a bad process. Really good retirement planning process puts you and your life at the center of everything. And your investments and all your other resources are there to serve your life. But if investment management is the focus of everything, you got a bad process. One of the most important phrases for a great life is, that doesn't work for me. Essentially saying no and having the courage and the comfortableness saying no, that doesn't work for me. Because so many people and things put demands on our time, our spouse, our children, our coworkers, our bosses, our friends, the charities that we work with, all the things everybody is going to demand things. And you knowing what really works for you and what doesn't, and being able to say, no, that doesn't work for me. And being able to do it with kindness, but with firmness is going to be a big part of you looking back and said, you lived a life true to yourself. This is a hard one. That doesn't work for me. And sometimes you have to build boundaries so you never have to get to that point. But the point here is you got to be able to say no. I read a book on negotiation recently. Actually, it was more of a long article or white paper. And they had an interesting comment. on negotiation. And I'm not a great negotiator personally. I don't know if you are, but they said you can't play win-win in negotiating. And this could be with your spouse. This could be with anybody. It doesn't have to be in the business setting, but you can't play win-win if the other party is playing win-lose. So when you're negotiating, whether it's your spouse or your children or someone else, it's really important to try to evaluate what game is the other person playing. Because if they're playing win-lose, you have to switch to a win-lose mentality in order to get a solution that you're going to be comfortable with. Because if you're playing win-win and they're win-lose, they're going to just take everything from you, which I think is interesting because I tend to play a win-win game. That's where I'm most comfortable. And then maybe that's one reason why I'm not a good negotiator, because a lot of it is, in a healthy sense, a win-lose, at the car dealership or whatever. So it's really important to know what position the other person's taking. The 4% rule gets a lot of talk in retirement planning. And it comes from an article written by a financial planner that was estimating the sustainable withdrawal rate from a portfolio that if you took out, say, 4% and you adjusted for inflation, that you wouldn't run out of money through a normal lifespan. And so it's good as a rule of thumb, but what we've ended up doing, a lot of people have anyway, is focusing so much on that 4% rule that we don't realize one of the implications of using that is that if you do use the 4% rule, you are very likely to die with way more money than you expected and potentially way less memories than you would want. Because the 4% rule is trying to give a safe withdrawal rate in all situations where you're not going to have all situations. You're likely going to have something in between, which is going to mean that the 4% rule is a lot lower than what you might have been able to do. So you'll likely have too much money, which is going to say, what could I have done? The rock in rock retirement, it's a verb. It's not a noun. Now let's get to some of your listener questions. So as I said, this month, we're going to be talking about your questions and trying to help you maybe a little bit on your journey to rocking retirement. If you have a question for the show, you can go to rogerwhitney.com/Ask Roger and submit your question there. So our first question today comes from Andrea. Andrea says she's planning the next steps for retirement, and she's about 7 or 8 years out. But as far as your podcast goes, she asks, which would be the best place to start with? Well, that's a really good question, Andrea. What do I do first, or what do I do next is always a great question, because it refocuses your mind away from all the far off things to what is my next little baby step. So excellent question. Just by you using that question, you're already on a good path. So where do you start? And honestly, this was sort of struck me. I don't know where to start. I'm inside my Coke bottle. I've created this podcast for over 7 years now. And every week we do a new episode, and I'm always planning forward, and rarely do I look back on where would you start if you listen to the show. So my first suggestion would be, as I was thinking on this, Andrea, is that I would suggest that you start in January of this year with the Retirement Plan Live series that we did, because we do that case study once a year with a different subject. And the reason I would start there is because week by week, we go through a organized process of the things that you're going to need to be thinking about when you plan out your retirement for 7 or 8 years out. What are your values? What kind of life do you want to create? How do you dream up your ideal retirement? How do you put numbers to that dream? Organizing your resources. Any Retirement Plan Live case study is going to have it spelled out of the things that you should be thinking about in an organized fashion. So I would start there. I also had looked into episode 259 is the start of a series on living without a paycheck, which is pragmatically the issue we wonder about the most. We have a lot of monthly themes that we've been doing for the last couple of years. And internally, what we have is a project, just so you know, Andrea, to reorganize the entire rogerwhitney.com website for the shows to have a directory of sorts. So everything is organized on topics. So you can quickly say, I'm really thinking about estate planning. Then find all the episodes where we've addressed estate planning, either via question or in an organized theme in terms of our training. So we're working on that. Had I known I'd been doing this podcast for 7 years, I would have created that along the way, but that's how life works. And if you have any suggestions for Andrea, by the way, in 6-Shot Saturday, just hit reply. If you have a place that you think she should start, go ahead and reply, and I'll try to follow up and share that, because we have a lot of new listeners, and it's not hard for me to remember that, but I don't see it so often. I think, oh, I mentioned that, and okay, I should talk about something else now. I don't want to keep repeating myself. So it's be helpful for you to share where you think she might start. Our next comes from Steve, which is really just a comment. It says, "Hey, Roger, thank you for including a response to my 401k questions this week. Much appreciated. I should have asked a long time ago." Steve says he's 63. He really enjoyed the non-financial stuff, and he's not sure if he's more excited or scared or maybe a little bit of both. Oh, and then most importantly, he says, "Oh, and please wish Rockstar Nicole a speedy recovery." I'm not sure what the recovery is for. Maybe was she sick at one point? I'm not sure, Steve. So this idea that you're excited and scared about retirement, that is very common, Steve. So know that that's normal. So a couple suggestions on that, because don't let that stop you. First of all, number one, don't let this stop you. A little bit scared, a little bit excited. That's what life is. Really good life is usually a little bit of both, right? And the other thing is start to find some friends that are ahead of you on the journey, because it's great when you can say, oh, wow, they just did that, and that's what I want to do. Oh, maybe I can do that. That's a natural thing that will pull you, so you're not looking at this in your Coke bottle. Like with most things, Steve, you're going to build your retirement plan out your pie cake or your cash flow, and it'll get you to a point where you intellectually know that you've really looked around the corners and put things into place. But it's never going to get you to certainty, because this isn't something you're going to figure out. You're just going to have to live it. And that's okay. That's the whole idea of being intentional and iterating. So good luck to you. I'm excited for you. So next question comes from Brian on HSA plans in the year of retirement. Brian says he's been listening to the show for about a year, and now others are joining them, including his wife. Welcome, Brian and wife. Happily, he's retiring May 7th, so he's about 30 days into retirement. Huzzah! Good job, Brian. They're financially sound, just tying up some loose ends, and their question involves health savings accounts contributions. So Brian says he is maxing out his HSA contributions via payroll deduction, but since he's retiring mid-year, he doesn't believe the company will adjust the amount deducted to reach their maximum contribution for the HSA. Brian says he's called the HSA provider, and they said they would take an after-tax contribution from me. My question is it proper, acceptable for me to maximize the contribution to the HSA via a non-payroll method, even if I'm retiring in mid-year? And he also wanted to note that his retiree healthcare via the company is not HSA eligible. So Brian, great question. So a health savings account, you're allowed to contribute certain amounts based on whose coverage, assuming you're covered by a high deductible healthcare plan. And that's an actual definition you have to meet in terms of what the level of deductible is on an annual basis. And it sounds like your employee coverage is a high deductible plan because you're making HSA contributions and the company set it up so you can do it via your payroll, which is awesome. The crux here is that you're retiring. You haven't maxed out your HSA for 2021. And when you switch to your retiree healthcare, that it's not HSA eligible. So first, the good news, it is totally acceptable to contribute directly to your HSA account, your health savings account, because your HSA account is not tied to your employer, because you actually opened up an individual health savings account that you can move to another HSA or continue to use even after you're retired. So it's not tied to the company, and it's acceptable for you to make a non-payroll contribution. As an example, for myself as a self-employed individual, I have a high deductible policy through the Affordable Care Act, and I make a personal HSA contribution to my HSA. It doesn't have anything to do with my company. The bigger question that you're going to want to figure out is what your limit is for 2021 in terms of what you can contribute to the HSA, since you're not going to be covered by a high deductible policy for the entire year. If you lose eligibility for an HSA mid-year, you're going to have to calculate, well, what pro rata period of time were you covered by the health high deductible policy in order to figure out how much you can contribute. So the first thing you want to know is the last month rule gets you full coverage. So if you were covered by a high deductible healthcare plan, at least up until December 1st, they'll just assume you were covered for the whole year. Otherwise, the amount that you can contribute to an HSA for the entire year is limited to the time that you were covered by that high deductible policy. So as an example, let's say you lose eligibility June 1st. So you were covered June 1st. So you get the whole month of June. So you were covered for 6 months of the 12-month period. And if we say you had a individual limit of $3,600, you would be able to contribute up to $1,800 into your health savings account because you were covered for half the year. So that would be your pro rata portion, 50% of what the limit is. So what you'll want to figure out, Brian, and you have some time to do this, is once you retire, which is now, and once you switch to the retiree healthcare coverage and you're no longer covered by a high deductible insurance policy or not life insurance, healthcare insurance, then what is your pro rata portion of 2021 that you were covered by that high deductible policy? And that will determine how much you can contribute to the HSA. So as an example, if you were contributing more than your pro rata share by month basis, you may have contributed too much in 2021, given that you were only covered up till the end of May. So it's based on the pro rata period of time that you're covered by a high deductible policy. So hopefully that will help you navigate that, Brian. And so glad you're listening to the show. All right, to finish this off, we're not going to go with a question, but I want to go with a confession, I guess we'll call it. About 7 years ago, one of my earliest episodes I did was titled 10 Reasons Not to Buy an RV, where I outlined my journey in purchasing an RV with my brother and sister-in-law who are now divorced, and how it was a horrible decision in the sense from a financial perspective and how I did it very poorly. And then the episode still gets talked about. I can still get comments on that via email. So I thought I would give you some closure and to help me get some closure, because I am very embarrassed to say publicly to you that it is only within the last month have I got rid of said RV. You say, well, Roger, that's not a problem. You've had 7 years of enjoyment in this recreational vehicle. No, I haven't. How many times have I used this RV in the last 7 years? 0. Haven't used it. Nobody's used it. It sat in storage under cover for 7 years, trapped in time. To pay for said storage, you're like, Roger, you got to pay for said storage. Yes, you're right. I'll pay $75 a month. Do some math. That's $900 a year. That's $6,300 over 7 years. I'm not proud. This is not a proud man talking to you. So if we use my trusted HP 12C that I've owned for my entire life, great calculator, by the way. It's an OG. That is, if I invested that over those 7 years and earned 5% a year, that'd be over $7,500 on that $6,300 I've spent on storage. If I had invested $75 a month in Bitcoin, holy cow, that'd be worth almost $47,000. Note, that's prior to the big crash in Bitcoin. I'm not a proud man when it comes to this. I, the retirement answer man who sit here and answer your questions, work with clients and help them in financial decision making, do everything we do in the Rock Retirement Club and helping people rock retirement, sometimes doesn't eat his own cooking, at least when it came to this RV. So what were some causes for the delay? Well, it never made the important and urgent list. So it was never that important in the scheme of things financially, and it never rose to being urgent in some fashion. So it was always in that unimportant, not urgent category. So that was one reason, not an excuse. These are just my after action report here. Another reason is inertia. And the inertia is a big thing with all of us in that, the way things are, they just tend to stay that way. And this RV was parked maybe 15, 20 minutes away. I never had to drive by the storage facility, so I never saw it, never even came into my consciousness. The $75 a month was ACH'd out of my checking account. And so it was mixed in with all the other ACHs and transactions throughout a monthly period, which can be a lot, right, in a family. And so I would notice it from time to time, but then I would notice a lot of other things and get distracted. So it wasn't anything that ever made an intentional decision about. And then every now and then my wife and I would talk about, oh yeah, we need to sell that thing, don't we? And then life would get in the way. So there were many times when we had the intent to go, oh, we need to sell that. And then we just fell back into the matrix and lost any concern about it. And I'm a big believer from a behavioral standpoint when it comes to retirement planning or whether it's selling an RV or something. We have these moments in time where we get, wow, we need to do that, right? It's like a pressure point. And that's like a window of opportunity to take advantage of it, because that window of opportunity generally will go away and we'll fall back into our rhythms and routines of life. I see estate planning this way, and I've mentioned that many times, that if we know someone that's passed away or we've had a loved one passed away, it's like, oh man, I need to take care of that. And then it slowly goes away. Much like whenever I get on an airplane and I'm, getting ready for a bigger trip, usually that's when I think about life insurance. Oh, what happens if this plane goes down? Do I have enough? Do they know where the documents are? But then by the time I'm coming home, that is out of my mind, right? So those are the primary reasons that it never happened. Life is busy. I run a couple businesses. I serve a lot of clients. I'm always thinking about everybody else. And it ended up thankfully being a rounding figure. Whereas if I had lost my job or we were really strapped for cash, I would have been really fine tuning. And that's part of why we need to be intentional so we don't let things go on. And I just failed myself in this case. Now, that said, I think of the camper, and so just so you know, Tracy, our community activator in the Rock Retirement Club, her and her husband drove down from Indiana and bought it. And it was fun because we got to go in it. We got to clean it up. It looks amazing. And they got a great deal and we got rid of it. And I'm so glad that it's in such great condition. It really was trapped in time. But doing that became a very nostalgic experience because I can remember Emma, my 23-year-old, being, 10 or so with these crazy goggles on, hammering rocks, just this dirty little crazy girl. I can remember Spencer and I kayaking in the blow-up kayak. I can remember my nephew Graham getting a tick. He was very young. He was probably 5 or 6 at the time. Getting a tick in an area you don't want to get a tick in and just screaming bloody murder. It was so funny. I can remember Claire, my niece, who is now 22, being about 12, and we were kayaking in a double kayak, and she was the laziest girl when she was younger. She's not now for sure. I can remember my wife and I playing games and hiking and fires. I wouldn't trade any of that for the world. I wouldn't trade that for the $6,300 plus the cost of the camper to go. So I don't look at it with regret, like this was a major financial blunder. It was in the optimization category where I failed for sure. So what are some lessons that you, my friend, can learn from this cautionary tale? Well, I think the first lesson is when you have these ideas of a camper or a vacation home or a bicycle is to go lean until you know you want to go all in. You can rent. You can tip your big toe in the water, and then you can go all in to something big. And thankfully, we did that. So when we bought the camper, just to be clear what this RV was, it cost us brand new $16,000 split between 2 people. And the $75 a month, my brother-in-law paid it for a certain number of years, and then I took it over. So it didn't hit me. It wasn't all me, and it wasn't some $100,000 huge thing. And so I think it really makes sense to go lean for longer than you think until you know that this is what you want to do. I was having a conversation with someone who wanted to start riding bicycles, and we were talking about bicycles, and it was the same thing. And I think BW and I were talking about this. It might have been an RRC meetup where if it's something you do on occasion, you can do it very lean. Just use the old stuff. When it really starts to become a hobby, then you can start upgrading. So going lean definitely helps. Second is another lesson I think you can learn is, and this is true in business too, you got to be very careful about committing to increasing overhead, increasing your expenses. So like it's one thing to like, I'll use myself as an example here, rent a home in Colorado for a month, right? That's a big expense. It's another thing to buy a home in Colorado. That's an ongoing commitment that you can't get out of. That's overhead, not a one-time cost. And so in your life, just like in business, we want to be very cautious when we're going to add a commitment that is systematic, that is harder to unwind. If it's a one-off, it's a one-off. You can make one mistake. It's not something that you're going to tie yourself to forever. I think the third lesson, as I've thought about this, is recognize when the seasons change in your life. So like for me with this camper, there was a little bit of, oh yeah, I got a Jeep, I can pull it. Maybe we'll brush that off and we'll start camping again. That was some of the quote unquote, perhaps rationalization that we were giving ourselves, that we were thinking we're in the season where we were going to use this thing, and it allowed us to continue to fool ourselves for 7 years. So I think it's really important to recognize a change in seasons. Now in retirement, that might come to the place that you live, perhaps the home where you raised your family. You don't need all the space anymore, etc. You got to recognize when these seasons change so you can readjust your life and not hold on to the baggage of a prior season. Clean out your closet. That's another lesson. Clean out your closet could mean literally cleaning out your closet to declutter, but it also could mean cleaning out your closet in your bank account, because everything is signed up for ACH. Everything is automatic deposit or draft from your credit card. And over years, you can start to pile those things up and realize that you're spending a lot of money on things you're just not using anymore. Anywhere from the HBO on the cable that you signed up so you could watch some series that's no longer on that you just never downgraded before. So I think cleaning out the closet financially on these type of obligations is a really healthy thing to do, and I failed to do. Now, would I do the RV again? Yeah, definitely. The way I did it, for sure. I think where I failed here is not recognizing the season had changed and not paying attention to clean out the things from a season past. So there's your closure on the RV from 7 years ago. And Tracy, I have no doubt that you're going to get, one, you got a great deal, and that you and your family are going to have a blast in it. Now let's go to the SMART Sprint.
On your marks, get set.
And we're off to set a little baby step we can take in the next 7 days to rock retirement. So in the next 7 days, my challenge to you is to identify one thing. Could be that old concert t-shirt that you never wear anymore, or it could be something that you're paying for on an ongoing basis, and clean it out. You're going to feel better about it. All right, just got here to Colorado. I'm off to learn how to fly fish. That's one of my goals for this month. Since we have a house on the river this year, is to figure out how to fly fish. Please pray for me that I don't get a hook in my eye. Have a great day. Hey, it's time for that all-important disclaimer. We so appreciate you listening to the show and love your questions and love the teaching that we're able to provide here. And actually, it helps us too. But remember, you're not our clients.
Not love it if you took advice from us on the show.
We would not love it if you took advice from us on the show. Realize it's helpful in education. Talk to your legal advisor, your tax advisor, or your financial advisor before you make any decisions.
We appreciate you joining us today for this episode of Retirement Answer Man. Be sure to visit rogerwhitney.com/answers to access the Retirement Answer Library with over 30 checklists to help you make the most of the only life you have. Remember, you have more power than you realize to create an amazing life starting today with Retirement Answer Man. The opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical and no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. Have a wonderful day.